President, please be seated. The court is now back in session, and before the chamber hands the floor to the defense teams, the chamber will first give the floor to Judge Laverne, who wishes to put some questions to the witness. You may proceed, Judge.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Witness. I would like to put some questions to you for purposes of clarification. First of all, before the executions you described, to the best of your recollection, do you remember hearing any statements made on the Vietnamese by cadres, whether they were cadres from your village or from the unit in which you worked? Did you hear any speeches or statements made regarding the Vietnamese?
No.
J'ai une autre question qui est...
I have another question which is different. Can you tell us whether since the events in question, the venue, the site and the buildings have changed, and if yes, what changes have occurred?
I don't get your question. Please repeat it.
Je vais essayer de la simplifier.
I will try to simplify it. For instance, is the pagoda building same as the pagoda building that existed when the executions occurred?
At present, of course, there had been some changes made by the monks there.
Est-ce que la pagode qui existe aujourd'hui est la même?
Is the pagoda that exists today same as the pagoda that existed at the time of the executions?
No, it was not the same since there had been some changes.
Alors, vous dites qu'il y a eu des changements.
You say that there have been some changes. Now, was the pagoda that existed at the time of the executions bigger, smaller, or of the same dimensions as the pagoda that exists today?
The dimension is the same. However, the monks have built other halls and planted some trees which are now fully grown.
Donc, par exemple, quand...
So, for instance, when you talk of the pagoda library, does that library, as it exists today, have the same dimensions as the library that existed at the time of the executions?
President Council Copper, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just an observation. I would appreciate it, Judge Laverne, if you at least use the word alleged executions instead of executions.
Écoutez, je me réfère à ce que
No, listen, I am referring to what the witness said himself. I don't see why I should talk of alleged executions, whereas he testified to the existence of executions. I therefore think I am entitled to talk of executions because that is what the witness himself stated. Mr. Witness, do you remember the question I put to you?
No, I don't.
Alors, je vais vous la reposer.
In that case, I will put it to you again. Mr. Witness, can you tell us whether the dimensions of the pagoda library are same as the dimensions today as the dimensions of the pagoda library at the time of the executions you described?
The dimension remains the same. However, it has been refurnished. For example, new repair work on the walls and on the roof.
Est-ce qu'à l'époque, il y avait plusieurs bâtiments?
During that period, were there several buildings? For instance, was there a house or dwelling quarters that existed close to the pagoda at the time of the executions?
There were some, however, I do not know how many.
Est-ce que vous savez
Do you know whether certain persons were detained in the other buildings apart from the library? Or in other words, were all the people detained in the library?
They were all detained there.
Est-ce que
before these events, did the pagoda house soldiers, or was this the first time that the soldiers were coming to this pagoda?
At that time, there were no soldiers stationed in the pagoda.
Is the change between the pagoda back then and the pagoda today, is it due to the fact that the fence that surrounded the pagoda was a bamboo fence? Is that the source of the change?
Answer. The fence on the national road was made out of cement, and the fence to the north, the east, and west were made out of bamboo.
And what's the status today? Is it the same fence, or are there more concrete fences?
Answer: I do not know, Your Honor, since I have never been to the pagoda.
Depuis l'an
From the place where you witnessed what you described, that is to say, the executions you described, was the fence separating you from the pagoda library, was it a concrete fence or was it a bamboo fence?
Answer: back then, as I told you, the fence on the national road was made out of the concrete, and then the other fences were some part made out of concrete and some other parts were made out of bamboo.
I believe I understood that the executions took place outside of the fence. So can you confirm that?
Answer: the first time I was at the outer compound that is outside the fence.
et quand
And when you were outside, you therefore witnessed executions that were taking place also beyond the fence? Or did the executions take place within the compound?
Answer: when I saw it, I was at the outside compound, outside of the fence. I was walking along the Onlongkong or the well, close to the fence of the pagoda.
Fine. So what you saw was something happening outside of the pagoda, or was it something that was happening within the compound? I'm speaking about the executions you described. Did these executions happen within the compound or outside?
Answer: I saw it happen at the outside compound, outside of the fence.
So, from where you were watching this, could you see the library, the pagoda library, and could you see the other buildings within the pagoda compound?
Answer: no. It was blocked by the fence.
I have a last question for you. You described a scene during which the soldiers disemboweled a victim to remove her gallbladder. Apparently, you were about 30 to 40 meters away. So can you tell us if you are sure that they removed her gallbladder or another organ, and why? Did the soldiers speak about this? Did you see this organ clearly? How can you be sure that they had removed her gallbladder?
Answer. At the time I saw she was tortured, there was a Buddhist tree close to the Andongkong or the well. And there was a branch of the Bodhi tree, and there was a kerosene lantern was used to light the place, where I could see clearly from the observation station. The axe with the size of my two fingers could also be seen by me from my observation station.
Did this scene surprise you, or had you already heard about similar atrocities such as removing gallbladders, and for what use?
Answer. I was so scared and terrified when I saw that scene or incident. However, with the presence of an older man with me at the time, I was courageous enough to look at the incident. After they had removed the gallbladder, they took it and went close to the edge of the pit where there was a container of alcohol. They dropped the gallbladder inside the alcohol and they stirred it with the stick or the bamboo stick, which was used to kill the victims.
I understand that you were terrified, but had you already before that heard that this kind of atrocity occurred? Had you already heard stories in that regard, in describing the removal of the gallbladder of certain victims?
Answer. No, I have never heard of it.
Now my last question. Can you tell us how old, according to you, the soldiers were? That is to say, the people who were carrying out the executions you described.
Answer. I cannot give you the exact estimation from my own eyes. There was one adult at that time, and they were as large as me. And he was as large as me. And the other soldiers were young, and they carried the guns and dragged it on the ground.
When you say young, do you mean that they were children, or teenagers, or young adults?
Answer. To my estimates they were about 14, 16, or 15, and I can say they were adolescents.
So therefore, you saw that these teenagers had trouble carrying their rifles,
Que les armes
that their rifles were too big for them.
Answer. They were arms. The weapons were AK rifles. The butts were dragging the ground, and they were too small to carry those rifles.
Thank you for having answered all of these questions. I have no further questions for you. Thank you.
បាទអរគុណជា
President, thank you. Now the floor is given to the defense team for Mr. Accused. You may now proceed to first defense counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honors, good morning, Mr. Witness. I would like to ask you some questions this morning and a little bit later as well. Let me start with following up on the very last question, Mr. Witness. You just testified that the very young soldiers that you described were all carrying AK-47s. Is that correct? Were all of them in the possession of AK-47s?
Answer. They were all armed with AK rifles.
And I will get back to that obviously later, but so rather than using their AK-47s to kill people, they decided to use bamboo sticks to kill the victims that you described. Is that correct?
Answer. Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I will get back to that later. You just described these soldiers as adolescents, young men, 15, 16 years old. Is it correct that around that time you yourself were roughly 18 or 19 years old?
Answer. You are right indeed.
And am I also right when I say that in April 75, when the Khmer Rouge took over, you were 15 years old?
Answer. I cannot recall it well.
Is it correct when I say that if you are 18 or 19 years old in 78, you must be 15 in 1975?
Answer. Right.
Did you go to school before April 75? And if yes, how long did you go to school?
Answer. I went to school, but I simply finished, low grades.
But do you remember how many years of school you had, and from what year to what year did you go to school?
Answer: I cannot recall it, counsel.
Let me try it differently. Did you go to school when you were 5 years old, or 6 years old, or maybe 7 years old?
Answer: I started school at 8 years old.
Do you recall in which year you started school?
Answer: I cannot recall it.
Could it be 1968 then? Or another year?
Answer: I do not dare to answer it.
Mr. Witness, can you read or write?
Answer: almost not. I can only simply, read and write, but very little.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Do you know the age of Chanta?
Answer: no.
Was she about the same age as you, or was she younger, or was she maybe older?
Answer: from her appearance, from her physical appearance, she perhaps was the same age as me, and perhaps a little bit older or younger than me.
Could you estimate for me how old she must have been when you saw her being killed?
Answer: no, I do not know.
Is Chanta a Khmer name or a Vietnamese name?
Answer: villagers called her by the name Janta.
But from where you are, do you know whether Chanta is a Khmer name or rather a Vietnamese name?
Answer: I have no idea. Everyone called her by the name Janta, so I called her that name, Janta.
Did Chanta ever show you something like an identification, maybe an ID or something? Did you ever see anything with her name on it?
Answer: no.
You also testified this morning that you didn't know her parents. Have you ever heard the villagers speak about her parents?
អត់ឮ
Answer: no.
I think you also testified that Chanta was born in your village and spoke fluently Khmer without a Vietnamese accent. Do you know for certain that Chanta was Vietnamese?
សាក់សីមក
President, please hold on, Mr. Witness. You have the floor now, International Deputy Co-Prosecutor.
Oui, c'est
Yes, this is an objection regarding the first part of the question when the counsel said that the witness said that she was born in his village. If we look at the written record, we note that he was not born in that village, but that he was only working there.
I think, Mr. President, I recall the witness saying yesterday that she was born in Cambodia, maybe not in a village. Let me rephrase my question. Chanta spoke fluently Khmer. She was born, as I understand, in Cambodia. How did you know for certain she was Vietnamese?
Answer: the reason that I know for sure that she was Vietnamese because her grandparents were of Vietnamese origin, and the villager also said that Chanta was a Vietnamese descendant. Regarding Giang village where I was living, actually I was born in Kampong Kliang commune. After a long period, I was sent by my father to live with my aunt in Giang village. From that time onward, I started to know Chanta and villagers in Giang village. And the grandparents of Chanta were of Vietnamese origin.
Mr. Witness, when the grandparents of Chanta were born, was there a country called Cambodia, or was there a country called Vietnam?
Answer: sorry, I do not know.
Well, assuming for a moment that Chanta is about your age, when the grandparents of Chanta were born, did Cambodia exist? Did Vietnam exist? Do you know?
Answer: I do not know.
Have you ever heard of Indochina?
Answer: when I was young, I heard of it.
And what have you heard of that name? What does that mean?
Answer: I do not know.
Let me move on now, Mr. Witness, to some more questions about Chanta. Is my understanding correct that the only person you knew who was killed was Chanta, and that you didn't know any of the other victims that you described?
Answer: could you repeat your question?
Well, yes, of course. You described people being killed, 50 or 70 or 600, whichever number. Was Chanta the only victim that you knew? The only person that was killed? Was Chanta the only one that you knew?
Answer. I knew clearly one person at that time, since we had been living in the same village.
I understand, but is my understanding correct when I say that the other people who were killed, you didn't know any of them personally? Is that correct?
Answer. I did not know the others.
Do you know, or have you ever heard later, why these young soldiers took the gallbladder from a girl? Have you ever heard why they might have done that?
Answer. I do not know on the matter.
Have you ever heard that doing such things is something done by soldiers against other soldiers in order to receive the strength of these soldiers? Or have you never heard such a thing?
Answer. No, I have never heard of it.
Do you know why it was that only Chanta became the victim of this this act? Why only she?
Answer. I do not know.
Let me now go back to the event in general that you described. You said that the victims at one point in time were asked whether they were Chinese or Vietnamese. Is my understanding correct?
Answer. Yes, that is correct.
You also said that the soldiers apparently knew beforehand Chanta's name. Do you have an explanation as to why they were asking people whether they were Chinese or Vietnamese, but at the same time they knew Chanta?
No, I did not know about that.
Can you explain from your observation as to the reason why the soldiers were asking whether the victims were Chinese or Vietnamese? Because after all, they had rounded up all the Vietnamese. Why ask again whether they were Vietnamese or Chinese? Do you know?
I did not know the reason for that.
Was it your observation at the time that Chinese people look like Vietnamese people?
I saw what happened at night time, so it was not as clear as it was during the daytime.
You said you saw the event together with a friend. Do you know whether he also heard those young soldiers ask the victims whether they are Yun or Chinese, or Vietnamese or Chinese?
I cannot recall it.
He never heard that question, so he testified to investigators. Do you have a reason? Do you have an explanation for why your friend who was next to you didn't hear that question?
It happened so many years ago, and I cannot recall that.
You said, I believe yesterday, that after these questions, or after this question was asked to the victims, that 2 Chinese families were not killed because they answered the question that they were Chinese. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
What happened to them? Have you ever heard anything about them? Have you ever heard stories of them living somewhere after 79 in your village, or maybe other villages?
No, I don't.
Can you describe for me exactly what happened when members of these 2 families were asked the question? What exactly happened? How did that go? Who was asking the question? What happened next? Do you remember?
When they knew that they were Chinese, they sent them back into the pagoda compound. And I did not know what they did there, whether they searched for their relatives, related husbands, wives, or children. That's all I know.
But when they said they were Chinese, were they immediately taken away from the others? What exactly happened?
They were separated from the rest.
And the rest saw that separation, like you did. Is that correct?
They postponed the execution.
What do you mean? They postponed the execution of whom?
stopped taking the people out from the pagoda. They sent those Chinese people or Chinese members of the family away first, and after that they started the killing again.
And this is something your friend saw as well?
Yes, he did.
Difficult question, but do you have an explanation as to why he doesn't describe in his statement what you just described? I mean, you saw everything together at the same time. Is that correct? I withdraw the question. Did you ever, at one point in time, hear anybody ask, "Are all of you Yun?"
Yes, I did.
When you heard that, what happened next?
They did the execution.
Did you hear anybody say, "No need to ask a lot of questions, kill them quickly so we can go to take a rest"?
I heard them talking among themselves, but I could not distinguish the statement that you made.
The two Chinese families that were sent away, could you see their faces?
No, I did not see it that clearly because I watched what happened from a distance.
Did those young soldiers do anything to verify the truthfulness of the answer of these Chinese families? Or was it enough to just say that they were Chinese?
No, they did not specify that.
So is my conclusion incorrect that anybody who would have answered the question whether he or she was Chinese with a yes would have been saved?
I did not know.
Mr. Witness, who was involved in the killing of Chanta? Who was involved in that act? Can you remember their faces?
No, I don't.
Do you remember how old they looked?
There was a man, and at that time his age was even older than my current age, and there was the only man there amongst the group.
I'm not sure if I understand your question, but do you remember the age of the soldiers who were involved in the taking away of the gallbladder, the killing of Chanta? How old did they look?
They were young, they were between 15 to 16 years old, and then there was a man who was rather old who was in charge of the group.
The men or the soldiers that were involved in the actual physical killing of Chanta, did they still carry their AK-47s when they killed her?
Those who did the execution did not carry any gun, and only those onlookers, soldiers, carried the guns.
Could you describe their clothes? What were they wearing, these soldiers?
They were wearing black pant and black shirt and a cap.
Did they have any other military gear other than AK-47s? Did they have something? Did they wear something to indicate that they were military?
They were wearing something belonged to a military.
Were you able to tell whether they belonged to the district, to the militia, to the sector? Were they soldiers from somewhere else? Had you ever seen them before? Can you be a little more specific, please?
I never saw those soldiers before, and I did not know from where they came.
Other than them having AK-47s and wearing black pants, what makes you say that they were soldiers? Is there any other thing that you were able to observe to make you say that they were soldiers?
In the regime, Besides the soldiers, nobody could carry a gun. So if you carried a gun, you were a soldier.
You said the event happened in November '78. Do you know if there was a war going on inside Democratic Kampuchea?
I didn't know that.
Do you know whether there was a lot of fighting going on just shortly before the Vietnamese came into the country?
No, I did not.
You spoke earlier about the chairman of Ying village, Sai. Did you ever see any of those young soldiers, or maybe their older chief, in the presence of Sai, the Ying village chairman? Did you ever see them together?
I did not.
Did you see these men ever again after the events that you described, after the killing of Shanta? Did you ever see them again walking around in the area?
No, I did not.
You said that the pagoda was not used at that time in any form. It wasn't used as a prison, for instance, or it wasn't used as a security center. Do you know why the soldiers went to this pagoda to kill Chanta and others?
No, I did not know.
Is my understanding correct that previously or before the events that you described, the pagoda was used as a sleeping quarter for your mobile unit?
Yes, that is true.
And how long have you yourself been sleeping in the compound of the pagoda while a member of the mobile unit? Was it for a few months or maybe a few years? Do you recall how many nights you have been sleeping at this pagoda?
My mobile unit stayed in that pagoda, but I cannot recall how long we stayed there. However, from my recollection, we didn't stay inside the pagoda compound for long, and later on we moved out and camped outside the pagoda.
Am I correct when I say that everything that you know about this pagoda, from the inside, the outside, is primarily based on you and your fellow mobile unit members sleeping there?
Please repeat your question.
I agree that was a difficult question. You were asked questions about the library, for instance, just now. You were able to describe the library. Are you in a position to describe that library because you have been sleeping for a while with your mobile unit members on the compound of the pagoda?
Before I entered and stayed in the pagoda, the library hall remained there. And when I was in the mobile unit, we stayed inside the compound of the pagoda for some days, and then we were instructed to camp outside the pagoda.
You know the inside of the pagoda and its buildings because you slept there as a mobile unit member. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, can you describe for me the period of time there was between you and your mobile unit sleeping on the compound of the pagoda and the executions that you described this morning? Were you still sleeping there when the executions took place, or had you left before?
The event took place after we had left the pagoda.
Where were you and your mobile unit members sleeping the nights before the executions took place? You were not sleeping anymore at the pagoda, but where were you sleeping?
Our mobile unit was instructed to stay in a building to the north of a pagoda, of that pagoda.
And do you remember how far north of the pagoda you were staying?
It is rather difficult to estimate the distance. However, it is roughly a bit over 200 meters.
Just getting back to my earlier question, do you remember how long you had been sleeping in the building north of the pagoda when the killing of Chanta took place? How long were you already there when the killing of Chanta happened?
I cannot recall it.
Do you know whether the soldiers that you described had already moved into the pagoda in the day or the days before the killing of Chanta? In other words, were the soldiers already sleeping in the pagoda before you saw the killing of Chanta?
I didn't know about that.
Can you explain why it is that you don't know? Because you were only staying 200 meters away. And you had been staying in the pagoda before. Can you offer an explanation?
Because in the morning I went to work, then we stopped for lunch, and then we continued working again in the afternoon until the break time. And of course, during the working hours, we were prohibited from going anywhere freely.
Except for that one particular night. You were allowed to walk freely, is that correct?
During the night that I saw the event unfolded, I actually sought permission to go and visit my home.
So it was a coincidence that you happened to get the night of when Chanta was killed. Is that correct?
Of course, at that time I did not know that the execution were to take place at that pagoda, nor about the gathering of the Vietnamese in the pagoda, and I happened to see what happened there when I was on my way to my village.
And why was it that precisely on that day you asked for permission to visit your family? Do you remember? Why did you want to visit your family that day?
I did not know whether it was a special day or not, but from my recollection, I sought permission to visit home that day, and when I was on my way, I saw what happened.
And is it my understanding that your friend also, precisely on that day, asked for leave to visit his family, or did he have another reason to be with you?
If you refer to the person who went with me, he was my best friend, so wherever I went, I would go with him.
So when he will come to testify here, he will also answer like you, that exactly on that day he happened to have asked for permission, correct?
Sorry, Counsel, that's an invitation to speculate.
Yes, I agree. I withdraw the question. Did your friend also ask permission, like you, to visit his family?
did not know whether he asked permission, but as I said, we went together.
I'm going to a new subject, Mr. President. It's time, I think.
President, it is now appropriate for our lunch break. We take a break now and resume at 1:30. Court officer, please assist the witness during the lunch break at the waiting room for witnesses and experts and invite him back into the courtroom at 1:30 this afternoon. Security personnel, you are instructed to take Kyu Sampon to the waiting room downstairs and have him returned to attend the proceeding this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now